Hi, this is Mrs. Solomon, and this is our second lecture in the first unit of our Introduction to the New Testament. This lesson is describing what it is that brought the New Testament text into being and therefore the Christian movement. This lecture is entitled Religious Experience and Resurrection Faith. As an introduction, Christianity began in obscurity. The movement appealed mainly to the outcast and marginalized of society. Significant numbers of converts were found among transients, slaves, and women. So, from the very beginning, the movement was persecuted. Yet, over 4 centuries, Christianity became the dominant religious force of the Greco-Roman world. So, why was it so successful? It was successful because the movement was able to make real for people the good news of God. And we can see these claims, the claims of the good news of God that were made real for people. We can see these claims in the New Testament writings. So during this lecture, we'll answer the following questions. What claims were made by Jesus' followers, the first Christians, and what were those claims based on? What is the definition of religious experience? What are the 4 elements of religious experience? And what religious experience did the first Christians claim to have had? So those are the questions that we will be responding to in this lecture. Take notes and we'll discuss them in class. Here are some claims that Christians made in the first century that we see in the New Testament writings. First of all, Christians claim to have a crucial role, a pivotal role in the future of the world. Because the world is estranged from God, and because now Christians have a covenant with God, they see themselves as the mediators to help reconcile the world back to Him. So the Christian community is where God's purpose for the world is revealed. In other words, the way the Christian community looks and the ideal of the Christian community is what God wants for the rest of the world. But interestingly enough, there's a dichotomy. Whereas they view themselves as sort of mediators between God and the world, they also see themselves as antagonistic toward the world. So the Christian community then sees itself as victorious over the world. And while they have achieved some victory here on this earth, the victory will be fulfilled completely in the everlasting reign of Jesus Christ in the end times. These are just a few claims that are made by the first Christians, and we'll take a look at a few more of those in class. But here's a question to ask. What were these claims based on? These claims were based on their own personal experiences. Their claims expressed realities that they said that they enjoyed currently in this present life. So because of this experience, Christians experienced freedom, boldness, joy, perseverance in suffering, and newness in life. These are powerful claims for people who are on the fringes of society. Basically, what we're talking about is them enjoying and experiencing salvation. Salvation for persons whose conditions were negative. Salvation and deliverance for people who had no hope. That's the kind of experience that we're talking about. But this was not an experience that they generated themselves. Of course, they could not. So where did this experience come from? It was something that came from and was initiated by God. So what is this religious experience? What is it exactly? According to Luke Timothy Johnson, my professor over at Candler, this is how he defines it. This real, authentic religious experience is a response to that which is perceived as ultimate, involving the whole person, characterized by a particular intensity, and causing that person to initiate an appropriate action or life change. Okay, so that's what he says about it. So let's look at the different elements of this definition. Okay, so in this first of 4 elements of this definition, this first one is that you have a response that involves the whole person, the person who's experiencing um, this experience. Sorry about that. It doesn't involve just one part of who you are. It doesn't just involve the mind. It doesn't just involve the will. And it doesn't just involve the emotions. It involves all and the whole of who a person is. Okay? Secondly, this is a response that the person is having. Once again, this is not something that is initiated by the person. So this person, the person who is experiencing this, is responding to a force that's outside of his or her own control. Okay, but this response involves the whole person. Secondly, this religious experience that a person goes through is a response to that which is perceived as ultimate, something that is over and above everything else, something that nothing else can reach, a transcendent power, an absolutely authoritative presence that is over and above any other presence. Okay, and so of course, as related to the New Testament, that presence is an encounter with the holy, which is God. Thirdly, the response that the person experiences as a result of this experience with the other is characterized by a particular or peculiar intensity. Sometimes the intensity is something spectacular, something ordinary, but it doesn't need to be. So when somebody is experiencing something with the other, their response can be one of tremendous praise, one of tremendous gratitude that has a huge outward expression, but sometimes not. It doesn't have to be that outwardly intense, but yet and still there is an intensity that suggests that something has to be done, that there has to be some kind of response. So that is the third element. But most importantly, when somebody is having a religious experience, that experience evokes appropriate action. The experience is not only felt, but it is acted out in a consistent pattern. It leads to life change. And so this is the most important element. It is most critical to religious experience, because you can have an experience, but if it doesn't lead to any life change, then you wonder whether or not it was an experience with the other. Now, that doesn't mean that the experience happens right away, or that the life change happens right away. It can, in my opinion, happen over a period of time. It can happen right away. It depends on the person. But crucial though, no matter what, whether it happens over a period of time or whether it's immediate, there is some type of lifestyle change that happens as a result of religious experience. So we're going to see all sorts of religious experiences as we read the New Testament. Behind, though, the experiences that we're going to read about, there is a fundamental experience. There is a reason why people had these different encounters with the holy. And that reason is because the first Christians experienced the risen Christ in an entirely new way after his death. In other words, the first Christians and many of the eyewitnesses, they experienced Jesus while he was alive. They experienced him in his life and in his ministry. Yet and still, his ministry was not over in his death. And as we will learn, his ministry becomes powerfully alive after his death, and particularly after his resurrection. It is the first Christians' faith in that resurrection, their faith that Christ arose from the dead, the belief in the claim that Jesus is raised from the dead. That is the claim that in which they said that they experienced God. And it is this faith, this belief in the resurrected Christ that resulted in the birth of Christianity and therefore resulted in the existence of the New Testament texts. So in other words, the New Testament would not exist without this conviction, without the conviction that Jesus is raised from the dead. That is the pivotal point at which Christianity arises, and it is out of that which the New Testament texts were written. So here it is. The experience that they had, their experience with the resurrected Christ, their faith in the resurrection gave birth to the Christian movement, out of which the New Testament was born. Now, we're going to take a look at these elements in class and look at some specific examples while we're in class so that we get an opportunity to sort of work some of this out and to see exactly what that religious experience looked like in the New Testament and how that gave rise to the Christian movement. All right, thanks, y'all.